Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's such an honor to be speaking with you all from Calgary. It's amazing. So, I'm giving a talk here at Calgary, so it's super amazing that I'm able to give actually two talks in one day. So, I'm honored to be invited by both communities to speak. So, today we're going to talk about building high quality Android applications. And the reason as to why this is very important to me, it's because we are now in the modern world and you need to ensure that our applications made to the standards. Now, before I start though, I know I'm not there to interact with you all one by one, but I'm just going to assume because I did give this talk to another college, and my assumption was that you either have tried to play a little bit with Android or I've heard about Android, but I'm not expecting you to be experienced in Android as of now. Now, the reason as to why this talk is important to me and why I feel like giving at this level is important is because when you go out to the world and when you're picking your career, because all of you are still in college, when you're thinking about a career, if you think about building for Android or maybe for iOS, which falls into the mobile development category, these are a couple of things that you can utilize to actually get started in Android and even build better applications. So building high quality Android applications offers a couple of great advantages, and that's what we'll be looking at today in my slides. I don't know why my slides are not moving forward. Technical difficulties. Oh, but there we go. and and here, as you can see, as we'll be talking through this particular reasons why we need to build high quality application, we'll be talking about the patterns that we can use. Okay, so a little backstory is when I started building Android application, we did not have any Jetpack Compose. We did not have any great patterns to follow when building Android applications. And I remember building my first application that had activities and activities and activities, and we had nothing like the MVVM pattern, which is the model view model pattern, which cleans the architecture of our application. We didn't have any fragments. Fragments are little screens that help you navigate within your app. I mean, right now, if you have your phone, just I know many of us might be using iPhones, but if you have an Android phone and also iPhone, they're pretty similar these days. You will notice that if you click on something, you might encounter another screen and a screen because definitely we need to display data on these screens. So before, it was a lot of work where we would just compile everything on this application on this particular major classes, for instance, the activity class, and then it would make our application very coupled. And then I think Android decided, how about we decouple this by ensuring that we have small screens that can help users navigate pretty easily, and not only navigate but also operate the application easily. So a couple of advantages in Android building for the modern Android world is Jetpack Compose, for instance. And that's why I mentioned there is a shift from XML-based layout to declarative UI. The XML base was kind of like built writing your views in XML, which was pretty tough if you ask me, but right now I find it pretty easier. And another thing that I've noticed with the latest way of building Android applications is, of course, something that we call navigation. And navigation in Jetpack Compose is pretty easy. Now, why are these very important if you ask me? So building high quality apps provides a seamless and enjoyable user experience. This includes smooth navigation, responsive UI, intuitive user interfaces, and this contributes to a perfect user experience. Now, why do I say this? I say this because I mean, you might want to be the kind of developer who builds for themselves. For instance, you might want to be an indie developer. How do you ensure that your application gets good feedback and good reviews? Ensuring that you build it for the high quality, with high quality in mind. Now, something else that I like to mention is a well designed app is more likely to be used regularly and recommended to others. And this will lead to higher retentions and acquisition in your app. So here we're talking acquisition, which is very important. So having your app seamlessly navigate, and you can use Jetpack Compose for this too, is very, very important. Now, managing state is very important, and this falls into the issue of reliability. I mean, when let's say I'm logging in, if I had entered my name and then I navigate away and come back and all that is gone. I'm like, as a user, what is happening here? So managing state is very important in the modern world. Now, reactive UI is very important too. Having a UI that reacts with the data. For instance, you're pulling from a backend and you want to ensure that whenever you pull, your data is displayed as needed. Very, very important to have that in the modern world. Something that I like to mention is that with Compose, you can easily do all this, which is very, very important. For instance, we have scope, states, and composition that you can utilize. You have state hosting and data flow that you can learn about. We have read. I know some of these words are going to sound a little bit out of reach because it's a lot of words, but it's a point for you to go investigate and see what are these things, what are they doing. And later on, we'll actually look into something that I also rely a lot on that really makes modern applications better is performance, reliability, and security. But we'll look into that later. But I would really I would really recommend that with Compose, just look into what you can leverage to make your applications more modern. Something else I like to mention is immutable state and immutability. And the benefits of that is just you end up with scope states and compositions, state hosting and data flows, your modern integration, and handling UI lifecycles, which is very, very important too. I know you might be wondering again, what are all these things? But again, like I mentioned in my previous slide, just ensure that you can look into how you can utilize all this when you're building for your modern Android application. So if you ask me in a general overview, if you've not done Android before, these words might be tech jargon, but as you start building, you'll start seeing these words pop up and you'll want to understand what are these words and what do they do. So kind of like getting that terminologies early in advance really helps you like know that this is what you'll need to ensure that you build for your modern Android application. So data fetching with Jetpack Compose, we use retrofit APIs. We use REST API using retrofit, and then we can also display dynamic content in app, which is very important. And we want to ensure that we are also applying recommended architecture patterns, which can really lead to great applications. And why is this important? Number one is because for performance, this ensuring that high quality apps are well optimized for performance. They load quickly, respond promptly to user interaction, and use device resources efficiently. This is very important because I don't want to be using an app that really drains my battery. And I know from time to time when I was building, when I started my career, I didn't think about these things. But as we're and advancing and evolving in this Android modern world, we want to ensure these are things that we have in mind. Now, when we optimize our apps for performance, optimize our performance, it really helps also in ensuring that users stick to our apps and they use our app more often. Something else that I like to mention again in this slide as we are building for this pattern, because it's just a pattern, an architecture, is reliability. So when you're building quality apps that are more stable and less prone of crashes or bugs, it's very important. I mean, I have to admit, it's not easy to build an app that's bug free, but always strive for that. How do you strive for that? By simply just testing your application and ensuring that your applications are well tested. And also something that I want to mention in performance is that you can use these tools to help you, like, just understand what am I doing wrong or how can I improve, let's say, best practices. For instance, what are the best practices for animations, because animations can take long. Because for instance, if someone is downloading your app and an animation is taking more than, like the loading animation is taking forever, that is not fair. So I mean, I would think that's not fair for me, even though I know I'm not the developer. I mean, I'm not the user, but I would assume that's not fair. So also ensuring we utilize things like lazy loading and pagination, optimize image loading, and then you can use the Compose UI inspector for this, and also look into what threading and coroutines are. Now, something else that I like to mention is, I was looking for this word before on my previous slide, which is recomposition. So ensuring that that's also well optimized and looked into. Now, something else that I like to mention is testing. Testing is very important because how do you ensure that your app doesn't have many bugs and is reliable? through testing, right? And something else that I'd like to mention that I think sometimes might be overlooked, but it shouldn't be overlooked, especially in the modern world, Android world, is ensuring that your app is secure. So high quality apps should prioritize security measures. That is to protect user data and to ensure the privacy of sensitive information. So with always, if you're using that party libraries, ensure that they're always up to date, they're well updated, and all the security vulnerabilities are handled in advance. Also, something else that I would like to mention on this also is ensuring that there's well developed apps that are designed to work seamlessly across different Android devices. I know I feel seen here, even though I'm talking about this particular topic, because I don't remember the last time we built for tablets, even though I know people are using tablet these days. But I do know it comes down to product, where product pushes and says, "Hey, we don't have many users that are using, let's say tablets. So maybe we shouldn't spend too much time there." But if you're building for your own or you're building an app from scratch, always look into having that and optimizing for ensuring that this compatibility. Something that I want to mention still in this testing slide that I feel like it's very important is scalability, right? I mean, high quality apps should be, built with scalability in mind. Always build where you think how you'll adapt when your user base grows, because you don't want to restructure your code every time you're scaling, which I think is really can be very, very, very tough when you think about it, right? Like, what are you trying to do if your app all the time cannot be well scaled, or you didn't build with scaling in mind? Now, I feel like I've spoken a lot, and I'm hoping you'll pick up one or two keywords that will really help you when you start your journey into building modern high quality apps. And when I was writing this talk too, I had a lot of thoughts like, am I giving a talk that is very high quality? What are the kind of words that I should use for people who've never like did any Android engineering? Because if I'm giving this talk, let's say at DroidCon, that would be very different. I will definitely go into depth of, let's say, what is hosting, what is state hosting. But I wanted to mention those particular things because I think they're very important for anyone that's going to start building for modern Android world. Why? Because those are things that you will see from time to time. And then from time to time, there's always that loophole where you might end up in a tutorial loop where you're looking, oh, what does this do? Why is it needed? So when you see them in advance, you can just narrow down your search to understanding, okay, what does this do? What is this about? Anyway, too much talking. Now, let's get our hands dirty and start building our basic Android app using Jetpack Compose, because I mentioned this before, and I would highly recommend if you're a new developer, because I know many of you are in college, so you've not worked professionally, and I do apologize if my assumption is wrong because I'm not there in person to know this for a fact. But if you've not built any application, or this is your first time trying to build any application, there is this particular thing that all Android developers go through, which is like building an app that fetches data from an API and displays them in a list of items. Very popular question in Android. Like all the interviews I've been to, I've not done many interviews if I can remember, but almost all of them had this kind of problem. So that's why I picked this problem to just guide you through a step where we can build a simple app. And trust you me, this is all pure pseudocode, but you can make it work. That's why I figured it's a good start to get people excited to know what's happening in the Android world and how they can get started in Android. So here, as you can see, we have something that's always very important. So number one, I got this question from my previous college where I gave this talk, where they asked me, hey, Madonna, what do I use to build Android application? I know I did not mention that in the beginning, so I was like, oh my goodness, I do apologize. I assumed everybody knew. So if you're new and you've never built Android application for Android, you will use something called Android Studio. That is the IDE that's used to build Android apps. For iPhone, which is our counterpart, you will use Xcode, which can be found on the MacBook and the App Store, and you need to have a MacBook to do that. You don't need a MacBook to build for Android, but I think for iOS you needed it. And if I'm wrong, please correct me on the chat too, because I think that's what I know so far. But once you get your app set up, which it always comes set up, you will need to ensure that you have compose set as true, and you will have all the dependency needed to start creating your application. Now, let me walk you through this particular code that we are going to build here. So here, as you can see, we have an annotated at composable. So this is an annotation provided by Jetpack Compose, and it indicates that the following function is a composable function. So what is a composable function? Composable functions are building blocks of the UI in Jetpack Compose. That's how I think about them. So they describe how the UI should look based on current state and data. Remember when I started the talk, I mentioned something about the state. So that's how you learn about what actually the state are and what the data is and all this other stuff. Now, as you can see, there's something called func main screen, which has two brackets, an item, list item, and on item click, that's a lambda. So this declares a composable function named what we've just mentioned, main screen, and it takes two parameters. So I'm just walking you through this code. The item, which is going to be a list of item objects that will be displayed in the UI. Now, on item click, which is a lambda function that takes an item as a parameter, this function will be called when an item in the list is clicked. Something that I also like to mention, in my earlier slide, I didn't mention about XML. Now, before XML, we had to write like, let me remember, 100 lines of code, or even more, I think 200, just to define a top bar. No, I'm not dramatizing this. But with Jetpack Compose, we have a scaffold, which makes this work easier. Now, what is a scaffold? You might be wondering. A scaffold is a composed component that provides basic structure for a screen, including a top bar and a content area. That's what you can see there, top bar and content area. Now, I might sound like I'm trying to memorize this, but these are things that I use every day. So I've been like, understand, like when I use the scaffold every day, I'm like, oh, I love it. Now, so what it does, it just simplifies the process of creating common UI patterns, because you might use a scaffold in a couple of screens. Now, the top bar, which is inside the scaffold parameter, is set to a composable function that represents the app bar. So if we open this app or we run this app, the title will be item list. Now, the content itself, parameter of the scaffold, is set to another composable function, the item list. And in this case, the item list component, you'll see what is in there. So the item list, as you can see, it takes the items, and then it has that particular thing we're calling on click. So whenever it's clicked, it does this. So this line invokes the item composable function, passing the item list and the on item lambda as parameters. And this is the content that will be displayed in the main screen area. I know, too much talking, but I'm hoping I was able to explain that in well-detailed context for people to understand what I'm trying to do. Now, before my slide, I spoke so much about the item list, but you can see this is how it looks now. Inside the item list, I have to say, when Google came up with Jetpack Compose, I was hesitant, as always. I mean, as engineers, it's okay to be hesitant from time to time, because you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going away from my comfort zone. That's how I felt. Sorry, I feel like I dramatized that. But yeah, that's how it feels from time to time. But when I started using Jetpack Compose, I was like, wow, I can actually flex as I code these days. I couldn't do that before, because most of the time I'll be like, oh my goodness, how do you do this? I have to Google that. I don't have to Google these days. I just think about, oh, if I want something to scroll in a list, that's a lazy column. So what is a lazy column? A lazy column is, think about it as a composed component for efficiently displaying vertically scrolling list of items. It only composes and lays out the items that are currently visible on this, on the screen. And it makes it more suitable for large lists. If you have so many lists, it's very, very nice. And I think we've talked about what the list item in there, what the list item is. That is just another composable that just takes those parameters, and you can see it has a text, and you can see there, once we return that, we have the text item.name, and the item.name, it just sets the text content of the list item using the text composable. The text is set to the name property of the current item. Now, something that I like to mention that I've done a lot. for all of you that are listening. When you get your time to just go through this code, just take time to click, for instance, on what the text is and just look into it, what can be done. And one of the biggest advantages of using Jetpack Compose is ensuring that you can actually customize your own text. You can give it a different color, you can make it have a different feeling, which is super amazing. I mean, I think we could do that before, but it took longer. Right now, it's way, way easier to do that. Now, the way I've structured my talk just to show you how you can build this, I wanted to showcase simple things and then I talk about also like navigation. Why is navigation important? Because I don't want to get stuck when I'm trying to navigate here. So what I'm talking about here is just showing you how you can create navigation. I have another talk that I've done on navigation, which I find to be pretty cool in a way because I love navigation. I'm like, oh, if users are using my app, I need them to feel like they're navigating well or it's not complex and all that stuff. So let's try to understand what this code does. So a sealed class screen, see that sealed class screen takes in a parameter that's called a root. Now this declares, so what I'm trying to do here is I have a sealed class, which is a special kind of class in Kotlin that represents a restricted hierarchy in which subclasses are defined within the sealed class itself. Because if you notice what we have object main, which just goes back and calls the screen. So it has a primary constructor that takes a parameter root, which I've mentioned before, which is a string representing the root associated with each screen. So that's very important because that's what we use to navigate. And then now, when you go to the detail screen, so what we're doing here, we have these items. If you're a vision person, this is how you should visualize it. We have this screen, we have items. You click on that item, you go to the detail screen where the item has more detail. So here, as you can see, we've talked about what a scaffold is. We've gone through what a composable is. We've gone through what a function and what it takes can do. And as you can see there in the pseudocode, there's another talk that I do about introduction to Kotlin and just talk about why we use a $sign when you're trying to get stuff in Kotlin, because you can see there what we're doing, we're concatenating the item name and item.name. So if you notice what we're doing there, that's just called concatenation. So what we're doing is we're taking this text, which is item name, and then we're doing the $sign item.get that particular object, the name, and then display that. And here, we want to see how we're handling navigation events, which is pretty straightforward too. Not very hard. We just need to call once items are clicked, use the nav controller and navigate here. Very straightforward. That's how we use the nav controller to navigate to a particular screen and route. And trust me, when you get time, just go through the slides and see if you're able to build this particular app, this particular application, and let me know what you think. I'm also always available on LinkedIn if you have any question, or on Twitter. I use Insta, but not that much. And then how do we fetch the data? So fetching the data, you have to create this particular function. So I have to mention, in this particular pseudocode, I did not go into depth of creating, let's say, a view model and all that, because you can actually use other patterns for Compose. But that depends with complexity. If your app is very complex, you will definitely need to look into what are the best way to do that. As you can see there, I put a little bit of description, fetch item from your API here, and that's there. As you can notice, it's just a demo and it's pseudocode. I'm just returning a demo, just a pseudocode there. So in this basic example, each item has an ID type string, a name type string, and for instance, if your item has any additional attributes like description, even URL, or any other relevant information, we will also include there. So if you wondered how our data class looked, that's how it looks. Data class item, and that's how we have that item there. See that? Item ID 1, name 2, that's how our data class looks. Simple as that. And then voila, once we're done, this is how the main activity looks like. And then we'll call the main screen. I didn't mean to say ice cream. Main screen, which has items, and then we can handle items, click, and then navigate to detail screens once you're done. And that's it. So something that I like to mention is that I know I give this talk. I'm always cautious about my audience because when I'm not available and I'm doing it online, it can be very tough because I'm not able to connect with you all. come through, answer the questions in persons, or even be able to ask questions as I mean, I know from time to time it's okay to ask questions as you give a talk, because sometimes it might bring up a question, because when we're dealing with technical topics it might be pretty tough, like just to understand, what is that, you don't want to lose your audience. But what I normally like to say is that it's always a continuous learning. So everything you've heard today, it might be a lot. I would say try to see what really resonates with you, and here the topic being building high quality apps for the modern world. So if you want to get started in how you can build that, try to see how you can utilize Compose to build such apps. And that's it. I also do do utilize Compose to build mobile app modern Android applications in my latest book, and you can connect with me there. Thank you very much. I would like to share is that when I started my journey in Android, like I mentioned before, my journey has been linear. I think being an expert really helped me a lot, and I became an expert because I stayed in one field for so long. Now, how has this helped me? It has helped me in this way. Right now, I'm able to code in Swift. I'm able to code in web. It's unbelievable because I think once you understand one language very well, everything else becomes easy to understand. Like, because the logic is the same. The if statements where you like loop and get the data, and I mean, unless I'm doing artificial intelligence or machine learning, which is different, I know I have to deal with some numbers and a couple of mathematics. I feel like in coding it's going to be pretty similar in all aspects. So understanding one is pretty nice, and then you can build upon that one. And I know it's not something that many people like to say, because many people have different skill set. They're like, I want to know, let's say, React. I want to know, let's say, this pretty well. However, I feel like, to me, I found that to be pretty tough, because I was like, why, how do I grasp one and then jump to this one? So that's why I concentrated on just one. So I started with Java. I stayed with Java until my 5 year. And then after 5 years, I jumped into Kotlin. I think I stayed with Java a little bit longer. And then after that, now I was able to jump into Kotlin, and it was pretty easy. And then I think before that, I've done C. I think C is what I studied in school. And C is pretty good language, but you can't build so much with it. I've done a little bit of Python. So I'm able to, I've done a project actually in machine learning before, where I would check on the probability of somebody swapping their credit, which was pretty interesting. So as a student, I know we always have those questions like, what should I do? What is the best stack to start learning? I would say just be passionate with what you want to do, find the niche and stick with it. But also, if you cannot stick with it, it's okay. I'm not the kind of person that's always like, telling you do. No. If you find that yourself you can stick with one, also okay. If you learn best in knowing a couple, also fine. But to me, being a master of one really helped me a lot, because right now I'm identified as an expert, and I can also pretty easily code web, which is super fun, and also iOS. I call iPhone. That's what I wanted to add. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Bye.